Good afternoon. This called meeting of the Midwifery Joint Committee will now convene. Since this meeting is being held virtually via Microsoft Teams, it's being recorded for record purposes. My name is Stephanie Godfrey, and I'm the presiding chair of the Midwifery Joint Committee. Moderator Abby Lefevre will now conduct an official roll call for declaration of a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Godfrey. Please respond present when your name is called. Dr. Amy Steele. Dr. Amy Steele.
Present. Sorry. Present.
Nope. Perfect. Dr. Alan Rosenbaum.
Present.
Dr. Carolyn Haraway-Smith.
Present.
Dr. LaDonna Thomas.
Present.
Meg Barrett, she just let me know she's not going to be able to attend. Miguel Pinheiro also let me know that he's not available today. Dr. Raquel Ingram.
Present.
Dr. Robert Rich.
Present.
Dr. Sharona Johnson.
Present.
Stephanie Godfrey.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Godfrey, we have a quorum for this called meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Lefevre. Should there be discussion or questions from Midwifery Joint Committee members during this virtual meeting, please identify yourself by name before addressing the matter. In accordance with the State Ethics Act and Code of Conduct for members of the Midwifery Joint Committee, it is the duty of every member to avoid both conflicts of interest and appearances of conflict. Does any Midwifery Joint Committee member have any known conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before the Midwifery Joint Committee today? If so, please identify yourself and the conflict or appearance of conflict and refrain from any undue participation in the particular matter. We will conduct this meeting in accordance with Robert's Rules of Order. Any voting will be conducted by roll call. Following discussion of any motions, I will call for a motion and a second prior to roll call vote of all Midwifery Joint Committee members. When making a motion, the Midwifery Joint Committee member shall state their name for record-keeping purposes. I will call on each individual Midwifery Joint Committee member for their official vote, and committee members should respond appropriately regarding the motion before them. If there's a motion to amend the main motion on the floor, the amended motion will be acted on prior to any action on the main motion. If an amendment is defeated, the main motion as originally stated is voted on. If an amendment passes, the main motion as amended is voted on. Are there any questions regarding the review of Robert's Rules of Order? Great. The purpose of this called meeting is to vote on the proposed permanent rules and direct staff to proceed with the permanent rulemaking process in response to the enactment of Senate Bill 20. At this time, I would invite Meredith Paris, Chief Legal Officer of the Board of Nursing, to present the information shared in the meeting packet and provide an update on the rulemaking process.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, again, thank you for your time today. You should have in front of you a packet that contains all of the proposed temporary rules that have been amended or looked at by board staff in preparation for permanent rulemaking today. In the issue statement that you have in your packet, it should be the first page of information after the agenda. There is a slight background. It feels like we were just here doing temporary rulemaking, but now we'd like to make these changes permanent. So this is in response to Senate Bill 20 and the technical changes to the midwifery statutes. These temporary rules were entered into the code on October 1st of 2023. Under the Administrative Procedure Act, temporary rules expire 270 days from the date the temporary rule was published in the register, unless permanent rules are adopted to replace them. These temporary rules will remain in effect until June 26, 2024, or until this committee approves and directs staff to proceed with permanent rulemaking. Board staff has received feedback from the attorneys for the Rules Review Commission. We've spoken with various stakeholders. We've reviewed and visited public comments and conducted further research as we've moved to fine-tune these permanent rules for your consideration today. In the chart below the attachment, you do have actually some additional rules where no action is needed. Those existing rules, those rules specifically are 0102 fees, 0106, 0107, 0108, 0109, and 01110. So those are not, there's no action that needs to be taken on those in their time, and this time they're just there so you can provide a full look of Chapter 33. I would propose, Madam Chair, there are 3 rules that were reviewed during this process, 3 temporary rules that did not have any changes from this committee's consideration. and adoption of the temporary rules. Those rules are 0101, administrative body and definitions, 0114, the annual renewal rule, and 0117, the prescribing authority rule. I would recommend, Madam Chair, if there's no discussion, that you proceed with a vote on those 3 rules, as the language hasn't changed. And my suggestion for the committee is that they take each individual one following that, because there have been changes made.
Okay, is there a motion then to approve and proceed with rulemaking for those rules with no changes from the temporary language, specifically 0101, 0114, and 0117?
This is LaDonna Thomas, so moved.
LaDonna Thomas has made a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Sharana Johnson, I second.
Sharana Johnson has seconded the motion. Now that we have a second, I will call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you are in favor of the motion, or opposed if you are not in favor of the motion. Dr. Amy Steele,
Approved.
Dr. Alan Rosenbaum,
Approved.
Dr. Carolyn Haraway Smith,
Approved.
Dr. LaDonna Thomas,
Approved.
Dr. Raquel Ingram,
Approved.
Dr. Robert Rich,
Approve.
Dr. Sharana Johnson,
Approved.
Stephanie Godfrey, approve. The motion passes. Now we'll turn our attention to the remainder of the drafted rules in this chapter, beginning with 0103 application. I'll ask Meredith Paris to present an update on each of the amendments to the temporary rules.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You'll notice in the packet that the changes are highlighted for ease and convenience. It's also in line with the requirements of RRC. You'll see that in 0103, the only thing that was added was to include the collaborating provider's name and licensure number on the application. It seems self-explanatory, but as we've learned, if it's not written down, we need to make sure we have it in writing for the rules to be in effect. So we did add that requirement. We also just reorganized the rule for better word flow. And those were the only 2 changes to 0103.
Is there a need for discussion regarding the amendments as discussed for 0103? Perfect. Is there a motion to adopt the amendments to Rule 0103 application as proposed and direct staff to proceed with rulemaking?
Dr. Johnson, I make a motion to approve.
Dr. Johnson has made a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Dr. Thomas, a second.
Dr. Thomas has seconded the motion. Now that we have a second, I'll call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you're in favor of the motion, or opposed if you're not in favor of the motion. Dr. Steele,
Approved.
Dr. Rosenbaum,
Approved.
Dr. Haraway Smith,
Approved.
Dr. Thomas,
Approved.
Dr. Ingram,
Approved.
Dr. Rich,
Approved.
Dr. Johnson,
Approved.
Stephanie Godfrey, approved. The motion passes. We'll now turn our attention to 0104, provider collaboration required. Meredith Paris will present an update on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In 0104, you'll look at line 16 and line 23. This is basically a grammatical change. We did change will to shall and may to shall to make it very clear and directive for our licensing regulated public. So we would ask that you make those changes as well, and also line 25, which strikes may from the rule.
Is there any need for discussion regarding these amendments to 0104? Perfect. Is there a motion to adopt the amendments to Rule 0104, provider collaboration required as proposed, and direct staff to proceed with rulemaking?
This is Dr. Amy Steele. I move that we adopt the rules for 0104 as presented.
Perfect. Dr. Steele has made a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Second, this is Dr. Haraway Smith.
Dr. Haraway Smith has seconded the motion. Now that we have that second, I'll call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you're in favor of the motion, or opposed if you're not in favor of the motion. Dr. Steele,
Approved.
Dr. Rosenbaum,
Approve.
Dr. Haraway Smith,
Approved.
Dr. Thomas,
Approved.
Dr. Ingram,
Approved.
Dr. Rich,
Approve.
Dr. Johnson,
Approved.
Stephanie Godfrey approves, and the motion passes. We'll now turn our attention to 0105 disciplinary action. Meredith Ferris will present.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In 0105, you'll note on page 2, this is a technical fix. It had indicated that the rules would be of this subchapter. It should be, we believe, chapter. So that is the only change that was made to this rule.
Perfect. Any need for discussion regarding amendments to 0105? If not, is there a motion to adopt the amendments to Rule 0105 disciplinary action as proposed and direct staff to proceed with rulemaking?
Raquel Ingram, so moved.
Dr. Ingram has made a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Dr. LaDonna Thomas, I second.
Dr. Thomas has seconded the motion. Now that we have a second, I will call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you're in favor of the motion or opposed if you're not in favor of the emotion. Yep, of the motion. Dr. Steele,
Approved.
Dr. Rosenbaum,
Approved.
Dr. Haraway Smith,
Approved.
Dr. Thomas,
Approved.
Dr. Ingram,
Approved.
Dr. Rich,
Approve.
Dr. Johnson,
Approved.
and Stephanie Godfrey approve. Motion passes. We'll now turn our attention to 0111 continuing education. Meredith Ferris will present an update.
Thank you. Members of the committee, you'll note in line 9 and line 19, these are just cleaning up the language and making it very clear and direct. We did add the Medication Access and Training Expansion Act requirements that would mirror the compliance. This, I believe, is also in line with the nurse practitioners. So I would ask that these amendments be adopted and we proceed with rulemaking.
Is there need for discussion regarding the amendments to 0111? Perfect. I think this had been one of the ones that we discussed more at our last meeting. And we had just asked that Kim had come back to us with APRN just to make sure that we were in line with other APRN groups. And so I'm happy to be in line with the NPs on this. Is there a motion to adopt the amendments to Rule 0111, continuing education as proposed and direct staff to proceed with rulemaking?
So moved, Dr. Johnson.
Dr. Johnson has made a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Second,
Second,
LaDonna
Dr. Steele.
Thomas.
Dr. Steele has seconded the motion. Now that we have a second, I'll call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you're in favor of the motion or opposed if you're not in favor. Dr. Steele,
Approved.
Dr. Rosenbaum,
Approve.
Dr. Haraway Smith,
Approved.
Dr. Thomas,
Approved.
Dr. Ingram,
Approved.
Dr. Rich,
Approve.
Dr. Johnson,
Approved.
and Stephanie Godfrey approve. The motion passes. Turning our attention now to 0112, scope of practice. Again, Meredith Ferris will present an update on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You'll note that the only amendment here is to strike the language in line 13, diverse settings such as, again, we've learned in our rulemaking that they like clear and direct. And so taking out the such as, we believe that the rest of the language there does capture all possible areas of care.
Do we want to put the inactive status together? Or do you want to you think we should do each one of these votes separately still?
I would recommend doing this one separately.
Perfectly. Okay. Is there a motion to adopt the amendment to Rule 0112, scope of practice as proposed and direct staff to proceed with rulemaking?
So moved, Dr. Steele.
Dr. Steele has made a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Dr. Ingram. Second.
Thank you. Dr. Ingram has seconded the motion. Now that we have a second, I'll call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you're in favor or opposed if you're not in favor of the motion. Dr. Steele,
Approved.
Dr. Rosenbaum,
Approve.
Dr. Haraway Smith,
Approved.
Dr. Thomas,
Approved.
Dr. Ingram,
Approved.
Dr. Rich,
Approve.
Dr. Johnson,
Approved.
Stephanie Godfrey, approve. Motion passes. Turning our attention now to 0115, inactive status. Meredith Paris will present an update.
Thank you. In inactive status, you'll note that there appears to be a lot of language that's crossed out. This rule did come from direct feedback that we received, and also in line with the research that was conducted by Kim Lewisana in our office. This amendment governs the reentry of a nurse midwife into practice for those nurse midwives seeking reinstatement of an approval that's been inactive or otherwise expired for greater than 2 years. Rather than do a course that leaves it up to interpretation as to where they are, what we propose is that immediately preceding that they have to follow the reentry guidelines for CNM. So that's very consistent throughout. And we've cited the reentry guidelines, which were already cited in the drafting of the rule.
Is there need for discussion regarding the amendments to 0115? Is there a motion to adopt the amendments to Rule 0115, inactive status as proposed, and direct staff to proceed with rulemaking?
This is Dr. Haraway Smith. I approve.
Dr. Haraway Smith has made a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Second, Rosenbaum.
Dr. Rosenbaum has seconded the motion. Now that we have a second, I'll call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you're in favor of the motion, or opposed if you're not in favor of the motion. Dr. Steele,
Approved.
Dr. Rosenbaum,
Approve.
Dr. Haraway Smith,
Approved.
Dr. Thomas,
Approved.
Dr. Ingram,
Approved.
Dr. Rich,
Approve.
Dr. Johnson,
Approved.
Stephanie Godfrey, motion passes. We'll now turn our attention to 0116, collaborative provider agreement. Meredith will present an update.
Thank you. The only update here is to make it plural so that we recognize that there could be more than one collaborative provider agreement in different settings. So that's the only change that we recommended here.
Perfect. Any need for discussion regarding amendments to 0116? Then do I have a motion to adopt amendment to Rule 0116 collaborative practice agreement for collaborative provider agreement as proposed, and direct staff to proceed with rulemaking?
So moved, Dr. Johnson.
Dr. Johnson has made a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Raquel Ingram, second.
Dr. Ingram has seconded the motion. And now that we have a second, I'll call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you are in favor of the motion, or opposed if you are not in favor of the motion. Dr. Steele,
Approved.
Dr. Rosenbaum,
Approve.
Dr. Haraway Smith,
Approved.
Dr. Thomas,
Approved.
Dr. Ingram,
Approved.
Dr. Rich,
Approve.
Dr. Johnson,
Approved.
Stephanie Godfrey, approve. Motion passes. Now we will review 0118, birth outside hospital setting. And again, back to Meredith for the update.
Why, thank you. This, members of the committee, comes directly from the language in the statute, but as well as our public comment and feedback that we received about the temporary rules. It was expressed to us that there are additional requirements for home birth specifically that distinguishes home births from any other setting. And that comes again from the statute that specifies that if ACOG has deemed it anything other than low risk, it should be prohibited. So what we did in this one was make subsection C very clear that in addition to the remaining requirements of this rule, home births cannot provide services in the following settings. And we listed the three known settings in which midwifery services are contraindicated and cannot be provided.
I've never seen it not malpresentation, but malrepresentation. Was that an intentional edit?
Did you say, I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
So it looks like the malpresentation got crossed out and now it says malrepresentation.
I
Yeah, I had
believe
the
that would
same
be a
thought.
typo. Yes, that's a typo. That would be a
Maybe your
typo.
fancy lawyers know something I don't know, but I've never seen that before.
And this is Alan Rosenbaum. I've been trying to read lines 32 through 36 several times over, and I think that there's just like a grammatical error somewhere. Does it make sense the way it's written to other people?
Yeah, it's not,
think-
there's something not flowing there. This is,
Yeah, what I would propose, I guess, is saying, in addition to the requirements in this rule, a CNM who attends and provides midwifery service for a planned home birth is prohibited from providing services in the following settings/situations. So you'd add who after CNM on line 32, and on line 36, you'd change out is for are.
Thank you, Dr. Rosenbaum. I've made those corrections on the draft.
And
Oh,
Meredith-
I'm sorry.
this is Dr. Johnson for Meredith and Madam Chair. I'm just, it says, it's already scratched through, but I'm just seeking clarification. It says for known situations contraindicated by ACOG specifically is what we had at first. So are these still in alignment, I'm assuming, with ACOG? You know, are these the only three? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, those are the only three that ACOG specifies.
Okay, all right. So we basically just listed them out.
Yes,
So-
and Dr. Johnson, thank you for mentioning that. ACOG is specifically mentioned in the statute, so we didn't feel it necessary to duplicate the language in the rule, but we did feel that those three situations needed to be listed. So again, clear is kind and direct, so that's why we included the three situations there.
Perfect, thank you.
Any further discussion about 0118? Meredith.
This is Marcus. I got my hand up. I don't know if I can see it.
Go ahead.
As Dr. Johnson was mentioning, asking whether these were the only three, I'm presuming the three listed comes from ACOG's committee opinion number 697, which was issued in April of 2017. And that does list very clearly that the Committee on Obstetric Practice considers fetal malpresentations, multiple gestations, and a prior cesarean as absolute contraindications to planned home births. A couple points. In the Senate bill, the legislature used the term inadvisable, not absolute contraindications. They said that pregnancies deemed inadvisable for home births by the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists shall be prohibited. So I'm assuming the committee is adopting the interpretation that inadvisable means strictly prohibited. And two, and that's fine if that's what the committee wants to interpret it. I mean, certainly within the prerogative of the committee to interpret the term inadvisable to mean strictly prohibited. The second probably important consideration for the committee to consider is what if ACOG changes that list? What if ACOG adds something to the list or takes away something from the list? Is there a mechanism by which the committee will capture that, or does it just have to go back and change the rule each time something is added and subtracted? Thanks. Those are my questions.
Marcus, did you have the year that ACOG put that practice bulletin out? Did you say 2017?
Yeah, I think it's, I'm looking at the committee opinion 697 from ACOG dated April 2017, which replaced committee opinion number 669, which also had the same three contraindications.
I don't imagine that I don't imagine that they would add, I don't think that they've updated that list in a long time, so I don't know if that's short-sighted, but I wouldn't think that they would update that anytime soon. So I guess my inclination would be, since Senate Bill 10 is probably more likely to change before the ACOG committee opinion on what can and can't be out of the hospital. My vote would be to keep it as written and then update as needed if ACOG does update that list.
What does that mean? Does that mean that there's a called meeting or?
Yeah,
how
I
would
think
we know?
if ACOG were to update that list, then we would call a meeting just like this to vote to amend the rule to include if they made another bullet point or took a bullet point away, which I don't imagine them doing either. Then we would just update the rule. But if committee members have a different insight, or
I'd also like to point out, Madam Chair, that the statute, which has more authority than the rule, does have contraindicated by ACOG. So I do think that that has a little bit of a buffer.
If I may, one thing about the rule is that's where most licensees kind of go to figure out what is allowed and permitted. So for instance, if ACOG was to change, add a bullet point, say that a home birth before gestation reaches 36 weeks, that any home birth planned prior to 36 weeks is prohibited. And if you look at Opinion 697, they actually talk about, it's more safe as the pregnancy develops and more mature. So any planned birth for premature labor, if the patient could be transported to a nearby hospital, should be done at the hospital. But so the point being, if ACOG was to, and I get your point, it's unlikely, and if they do change their opinion, then you can go back and change the rule, but there will be a lag time. And most providers see the rule as the do's and don'ts, and there'll be this lag time where the statute and the rule will be not square. One way of doing that, and I'm not suggesting this, just something to think about, there's a lot of process between now and the final rule is adopted. You could put in a catch-all number 4 in any other contradiction as required by ACOG or some other language, sort of a catch-all number 4. So that way, if ACOG does change, you've already built in a mechanism that captures the change. Then that's just a suggestion. If it's too much work, I understand, and I'm not speaking against it. I'm just saying that's something you may want to think about.
I was just reading up through the top of that to refresh my memory about what else is included in like the signed, written, informed consent agreement. I thought that there was something in there that kind of alluded to the fact that they had to be low risk, but that might just be the A1C, the information about procedures, benefits, and risk of planned births outside hospital setting. Because I get your point. I don't want to have to call another meeting to make a vote every time, ACOG decides something is different for low risk versus not low risk. But I think if the committee is comfortable with the kind of hard recommendation, not the inadvisable, but the hard contraindication, I'm comfortable with it as it's written, but willing to hear obviously from any member of the committee.
I prefer the term contraindicated. As opposed to inadvisable.
Yeah. That's not actually written anywhere though, except on ACOG's website, right?
So on the copy that I'm reading under C, it's like the last note, it does say contraindicated by ACOG, including fetal malpresentation, multiple gestation, and prior C-section. Am I looking at the wrong copy?
Well, that's what part of the language that had a strike through, which I think was what Marcus was kind of drawing our attention back to. It's crossed out. It's the strike starts at on line 33 where it says outside, and then the strike ends after specifically on line 36.
On this copy, it's not struck out, so that's the issue. I see.
So I'm comfortable with it not saying ACOG. I think because those contraindications really have been consistent since ACOG had a statement about home birth. I think the malpresentation, the multiple gestation, the prior C-section are always going to stand. So I'm comfortable leaving it without the ACOG language. When I call for a vote for this, Meredith, do I need to read the part that we've changed from a grammatical?
Yeah. Why don't we do that, Stephanie? Because I think to be clear, to make sure we're on the same wavelength.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so is there a motion to adopt the amendments to Rule 0118 birth outside hospital setting as proposed, which would read, in addition to the requirements, so on line 32, where you're at C for 0118, it would read, in addition to the requirements in this rule, a CNM who attends and provides midwifery services for a planned home birth is prohibited from providing services in the following settings/situations: malpresentation, multiple gestation, and prior C-section or prior cesarean. Is there a motion to adopt that amendment as proposed?
Motion to adopt, Rosenbaum.
Dr. Rosenbaum has made a motion to adopt. Do I have a second?
This is Dr. Thomas. I second.
Dr. Thomas has seconded the motion. Now that we have a second, I'll call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you are in favor of the motion or opposed if you're not in favor of the motion. Dr. Steele?
Approved.
Dr. Rosenbaum?
Approve.
Dr. Haraway Smith?
Approve.
Dr. Thomas?
Approve.
Dr. Ingram?
Approve.
Dr. Rich?
Approve.
Dr. Johnson?
Approved.
Stephanie Godfrey, approved. The motion passes. Turning our attention now, only two more, guys, we can do it. Turning our attention to 0119, petitioning for rulemaking. This is a newly proposed rule for our consideration. Meredith Paris will provide background on this rule as well as contact rule 0120.
So background rules pretty simple. This suggestion came from the RRC attorneys as we were looking at the temporary rules to consider adding these when we were going through permanent rulemaking. So that's where 0119 and 0120, the language comes from.
Sorry, I had to scroll all the way up to find it. Is there any discussion regarding the motion to direct staff proceed with rulemaking for 0119 and 0120? Is there a motion to direct staff to proceed with rulemaking for Rule 0119 and 0120?
Raquel Ingram, motion approved.
Dr. Ingram has made a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Dr. Thomas, I second.
Second.
Dr. Thomas has seconded the motion. Now that we have a second, I will call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you're in favor of the motion or opposed if you're not in favor of the motion. Dr. Steele?
Approved.
Dr. Rosenbaum?
Approve.
Dr. Haraway Smith?
Approve.
Dr. Thomas?
Approve.
Dr. Ingram?
Approve.
Dr. Rich?
Approve.
Dr. Johnson?
Approved.
Stephanie Godfrey approves. The motion passes. Board staff will be reaching out to schedule the next called meeting between August 5th and August 16th, consistent with the rulemaking timeline requirements. As a reminder, the annual meeting of the Midwifery Joint Committee will take place on November 19th, 2024. Thank you for your attendance and participation at this called meeting of the Midwifery Joint Committee. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Dr. Thomas.
I'm sorry, that's Dr. Haraway Smith.
Dr. Haraway Smith has made a motion to adjourn the meeting. Do I have a second?
This is Dr. Thomas. I can second.
Dr. Thomas has seconded the motion. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
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 Thank you. This concludes today's called meeting of the Midwifery Joint Committee.